My tools better be clean and sharp. Better be ready. It better be perfect.
All right, so we are in Montreal, Canada, with Xavier Bourque. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah,
That's,
yeah, that's
oh,
good. Close enough.
now when someone says that, it means I pronounced it wrong.
No, 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 but that's the way I roll when I do it in English. No problem.
Okay, I'll go with that. Now,
Yep.
this is I figured I'd just zoom up on Montreal here, and I was just poking around on Montreal's satellite here, just seeing where everything's at, some of the companies you'd worked at, and I noticed, is it Ubisoft that bought Hybrid? Hybrid?
Yeah, yeah. Hybrid though. So UB, which is a huge video game company,
Mm-hmm.
French company, have had offices in Montreal for years now. They do like the big AAA games there and stuff. And they bought Hybrid a few years ago. I want to say 8 years ago or something like that. I'm not sure. And yeah, but Hybrid's where I started at years ago, 20 years ago or so. And they bought them, but usually these things don't go well. But in this case, the hybrid kept putting along in a corner. And it's kind of a little side project for Ubisoft. It's such a tiny, amount of revenue compared to the gaming side. They just leave them alone and they keep doing this stuff. So I think it's pretty great for them. So it kind of makes them more stable a little bit. Not that they were very unstable. They were quite successful over the years, but it just like if there's a little, dry patch, then they've got this safety net of the big company that can back them for a while. So yeah, good for them. That turned out surprisingly well. Usually these things turn out really
Terrible.
bad when a big company buys a small company, but in this case, I think it worked out pretty well for them.
So
I
was
think
this
people.
was this where you were working, and then here's where the big Ubisoft game
I worked
area
there for a
was?
little bit, but when I started, the main office for Hybrid is quite special. They have an office up in the mountains, like
Oh
about an
wow.
hour north of Montreal. So it's kind of they bought a house and they kept expanding it. So now they still have the house, but built around it extra office space and stuff like that. So it's
Take it
yeah,
that
that's the house. That's the one. So that's where I worked for a
it's like a
while.
Lucas Ranch in Montreal, huh?
Kind of, yeah, yeah, but actually, yeah, kind of Lucas Ranch-ish. Yeah, maybe not as sprawling. They don't have as much square footage. But yeah, it's kind of the same idea. It's a very special place to be. It's a weird gig because most VFX work gets done in big cities, London, Vancouver, that kind of stuff, Montreal. But they have this little outpost out. So, but they have offices here in the city as well. So they've got both. So
So if you
you
live in
pick
the
and
city,
choose.
are you like having to like commute all the way out to the mountains every day, or?
Well, now they have offices also in the city. So they've
Oh,
got
okay.
offices in the city and in the mountains. But for years, if you wanted to live in the city, you had to commute,
Wow.
do the reverse commute. Most people go from the suburbs and come to the city for work. Now you had to do both. A lot of people live up there. It's, if that's the kind of lifestyle you want, it's pretty great, because you've got ski hills and, nature and no traffic and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool.
Now, again, I have to, by default, I got to ask about the big C. Are you guys like all, are all, I understand you're teaching at a school now, but are all these studios still on lockdown, or were you working at home, or?
Yeah, well, for me, for school, I'm teaching from home, on Zoom and stuff. I think most studios now are still on remote work. That's what I get just from
Mhm.
anecdotal info from my friends and stuff like that. So maybe some people are working on site, but I think a lot of people are working from home right now.
So I did a search on your LinkedIn, and you have again huge history. You're one of the what I call the veterans. You go as far back as Sky Captain, which I'm like, oh my gosh, Sky Captain and
My
Spy
very
Kids.
very first show was Spy Kids 1, the very first
Wow.
Spy Kids, Robert Rodriguez in 2000, I think. So yeah, I've been doing this for a little while.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And of course, we all know you from your plugins. The first time I was introduced to you was working at a place called Filmworkers, and I started seeing all of your. I'm like, What's this plugin PFX or whatever? Or and I'm like, it's like, oh, Pixelfudger. Um, so here's your website, XavierBourque.com, and you have all types of cool stuff in here, shots, reels, and then of course your plugin series, Pixelfudger, I love how you got rich, creamy pixel fudging tools. And then here are a whole bunch of them. So we're going to kind of do a quick demo of these, or maybe, I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, I've got a pretty extensive demo of every tool, if you're into that.
now this is something that is available in Nukepedia, so you could just like get it from there, or just through your
Yeah.
website download Gizmo. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Same plugins. They're identical.
then I got IMDb. So again, you got Spy Kids, Spy Kids 2, Napoleon. You got a lot of movies in here that are actually like gems in the rough, like films people don't recognize, but are actually really good films.
Like Snakes on the Plane.
Yeah. I remember going to the theater to see that. I had a great time. It was so ridiculous. It was like
I remember
the whole
the
audience.
execs.
It was a great audience movie. Everybody was just like laughing. That's the last time I
Indeed.
really remember like an audience getting really into a movie and just having a ball.
Yeah. The execs came over because they weren't sure about that movie, how to market it. So I think this is the only time that happened in my whole career. Actually, studio execs came over to that house in the hills that you showed from Hybrid, and they had a screening of the offline, of like a fairly progressed offline, like some effects weren't done and stuff. And there's a shot they really weren't sure about there was a dog that was implied that was getting killed, which is a big no-no in Hollywood. And they were expecting, they were like unsure, do we want to keep it or stuff? So they were kind of in the room when they showed the movie to these, we're all kids, working in VFX, so the average age was like 27 or something, and the people cheered when the dog died, and they were like, yeah, and people were cheering, and they were baffled, like, who are these people, what's wrong with them, this is a dog, it's like, we know it's a movie, guy, it's not real. But they I think they got encouraged by our reaction, and they kept it in the movie.
That's cool. Then you got Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, Iron Man, of course, Indiana Jones. This was some amazing VFX.
Depends on the sequence. Some of it's pretty rough.
Really?
I don't know if that's my best work. I was actually quite pleased when I have a couple shots in there that keep popping up in those, like, what's it called? The fake trailers where they, honest movie trailers and stuff like that, when they make fun of the movie. I have a couple shots that keep popping up in those reviews, like the funny reviews. I'm pretty proud of that.
The Journey to the Center to the Earth. Knowing actually, I like Knowing. I know a lot of people didn't like that film, but I thought that was a cool flick. I don't know, just me.
Yeah, it's all right. It kind of falls apart a little bit at the very end, but yeah. That's another actually. So that's another one where there was a weird reaction when we watched the edit that was at Animal Logic in Australia, and there was supposed to be a big dramatic scene where like Nick Cage's kids are taken away or something, and he falls to his knees and starts crying, or he goes no or something, and people just laughed in the theater. That was so weird because we had no context.
Oh, and then they replaced it with the scene
movie
where he visits his dad and just hugs his dad, right?
No, I think it's when the aliens pick up the kids and
yeah.
go with them.
But and then the rocks go up in the air, and then he.
Yeah, that's the sequence. Yeah, that's it. But we didn't know the whole movie. We had no context. We only had that one sequence to look at to see all the effects shots in it. But that's one of the very few times we had the audio, and it made such little sense without the context. It came out of nowhere, and everybody started laughing.
It is, for VFX artists, when you get your, string outs of the of different clips, like I'm working on a Netflix series right now, and I'm like, what is this? What's going on?
Yeah, we have no idea very often what's happening.
And sometimes, you got to ask, like, what? Okay, I'm going to need some context to understand why you're having me do this. Blah blah blah. But anyway, and then of course Prometheus. That must have been fun.
Yeah. That was at Fuel VFX in Australia. Great shop. That's another one that got bought out by a bigger company. They got bought out by Animal Logic.
So Animal Logic owns Fuel, and Fuel disappeared?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, of course, my favorite director, Denis Villeneuve, Arrival. Great film.
Yeah.
It's very hard to find people who are professional VFX people and interview them for my show that are from Canada. my past interviews have a lot been European, some in LA, but a lot of Europe and around the world. But it seems like you guys are so busy. I can't get hold of nobody, especially over in Vancouver. This just seems like whenever I try contacting people, it's just like dead space. I'm like, okay, either you hate the show or, you know. But
I watch your stuff, casually. I've seen quite a few of your interviews, so I don't know. Maybe I don't know what's the story. I don't know why people are ignoring you. I think your show's
no,
good.
I don't think. I think they're just busy. Honestly, I think they're just. I hear people like, I'm too busy working on I got a student working on the Matrix 4, and he's just like, I can't even get a hold of him. He's just like, I'm like, hey, I got a question. He's like, I'm busy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, Valerian,
I did very little on that. That's kind of a fake credit type of thing. Not fake credit, but like I worked on 4 shots that are very not that exciting. So yeah, it adds a line in the IMDb, but I wouldn't say I worked on that movie very much. That's kind of
that was the expected almost sequel desire for the Fifth Element in a way, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, ooh, Fifth
yeah.
Element, we'll sell that again, But something about that movie came off as extremely like, I don't know, sharp and clinical looking, and just it didn't have the organic look of the original, or the Fifth Element, I should say, from the same artist.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a different era, Fifth
Yeah,
Elements, you see those photos, behind the scenes photos of these huge miniatures
yeah,
and,
the giant buildings.
that stuff. Yeah, yeah. So it's different vibe.
Cross My Heart, Zoe the Predator, which is a TV show, right?
No, that was
No.
the remake movie,
Okay.
the Shane Black one that came out, a couple of years ago. Again, I only worked like on a few shots on this show.
Gotcha. And then Maniac is worked on that. And
That was a Netflix, yeah.
the so the companies in the area that you're at in Montreal, like Renault and Hybrid, and I think there's a couple of other ones you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. So
Well, there was Oblique. They've shut down since then. But there's a lot of work here in town. I maybe not quite as big as Vancouver, but really close now. There's so many shops here. All the big ones, the British ones like MPC, Cinesite, Framestore are here. Framestore is pretty big here. There's Rodeo. I've never worked there for comp, but it's a pretty big place now. Hybrids here. Renault's a tiny boutique house. They're specialized in mostly environments. They do more than that, but that's their main trademark because the owner used to be a matte painting at ILM. Um, I don't know. There's a whole list. So we've got like the massive, multi-hundred people studios, and we've got tiny boutiques. Not much in between now, but yeah. So there's lots of work here.
the and then you're currently teaching at ESMA. Is this the school or
I
no?
think that's the wrong school.
That's right.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Yeah, yeah.
I knew I was gonna get the wrong. It's
Yeah,
NAD,
that's
right?
one. NAD. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Let's see if I can find it. There's like it's like NAD UQAC. Is that it? Or
Yeah, so that's a French language school, because UQAC is the name of the university, and NAD used to be like specialized animation. That's the one. So it used to be just an animation, 3D, VFX type school, and they got merged with this university. So now that's why it's called that. So their main curriculum, the 3-year university program, is mostly animation and lighting, CG type of stuff with some live action and some compositing, but it's not the main focus of the program. But I teach professional formation, so basically it's people that are outside of the school system that want to go back to school for an intensive, like 17-week class focused solely on compositing. So that's what I teach mostly there.
so in regards to like the schools in Montreal, we just had we just had somebody from Lost Boys,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they're in your neighborhood too, right? In Montreal.
Yep, yep. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I mean, they're mostly like they're originally from Vancouver, of course. So I think that's where most of their their alumni come from, or that's where they have the biggest presence. But they opened, I don't know, I'm not sure, I haven't followed them that closely, but a couple of years ago they opened a branch here in Montreal, so that's cool. There's a little bit more formation going on. There's it's it's a big need. I think it's underestimated how much training needs to happen. It seems like the MO at most companies is outsourcing to other companies training. So nobody wants to hire rookies. Everybody wants to have fully formed compers fall from the sky, and land on their lap. So when you ask, I did a session a few years ago to kind of gauge what the industry needed. So I got all of my friends or people that I knew that were in, high enough places at different studios to come down at the school. And I asked them, like, point blank, think of the most junior people in your team. Where do they come from? Do they come from our school, from another school, from some private place or they just self-taught, or where they come from? And most people were like, I don't know. Or they were just, we don't hire rookies. We just, so they just expect other companies to take the hit and to get a rookie. So it's kind of a game of musical chairs. Everybody wants to have 3-year experience mids come in. And then at some point, somebody gets left holding the bag. And they're like, okay, we can't find anybody. We'll pinch our nose and we'll get a junior. So recently, before COVID times, there was a little uptick in like internship programs. So the bigger companies like Framestore and Cinecite and Rodeo started to set up internship programs to at least have a fighting chance for a rookie to get in the door, but they were very, limited in terms of number of places. But that was a kind of a positive change. And then COVID happened, and they all pulled the plug on it, and because internships is hard enough. If it's over working from home, remote, it's even harder. So I can't really blame them, but basically it's just a time bomb, because at some point the older artists are gonna retire, and you gotta fill in the
has COVID created
seats.
a gap in regards to this sort of like mentorship to young, mavericks?
I think so.
It did. Okay.
I think so. Because it's a tough one to crack. It's a really tough one to crack. I think because if you find a company that's cool enough that they're gonna get an intern or a rookie, a true rookie straight out of school, and usually the best way to learn is just sit them in the middle of the room with people that have more experience, give them simpler tasks, and when they get stuck, they can just poke their head out and go, oh, Julie's not working, doesn't seem to be that busy. I'm going to ask her about my problem where my shot doesn't go on the farm or something, or Mark is not that busy. But when you're at home, even if you got a really slick remote desktop setup and the whole setup with the webcams and everything's cool, you still don't know if you're interrupting. You're sending text messages to your colleagues. You don't know who they are really. You don't know if they're busy because you can't see them, and and you might get ignored. So now you're alone in your bedroom and no answer. And you're like, what now? I'm stuck, So it's a tough one. It's a tough one. It's starting to pick up a little bit. I've had, students recently get hired on a remote desktop situation. So there are some companies where they kind of biting the bullet, and they're like, well, I guess we have to do this. So it's a tough one. It kind of threw a wrench in the whole thing. It felt like the program where I'm teaching starting to get a little bit of recognition, and it's a little bit easier for students to show that they finished a class and that it's worth something. And then the whole COVID thing threw a wrench. In terms of teaching, it actually kind of made my life a little bit easier, actually. To be honest, once you have a good setup with Zoom, and I set up Discord channels for my classes so they can talk to each other and I can talk to them and stuff like that, it's actually easier, because when I'm in the classroom, I only see tops of heads because they're all behind monitors. Now I can see their faces, and when I go too fast or it's not clear, I see faces going like, and I'm like, okay, maybe I should explain that again. And yeah, it saves everybody's a huge commute, because most not all students can afford to live close to the school because it's really downtown. So a lot of them have to take the bus, an hour each way. So it saves them like 2 hour commute every day. And, so it sucks if you don't have good space at home to work, if you don't have a good physical desk and monitors and stuff like that. But for me, it actually, and it's easier on my voice also because we had these big classrooms with AC and stuff like that, and it's noisy with the computers, so I have to talk quite loud now. I just whisper into my microphone, and all my students hear me pretty clearly, I hope. So, yeah. In terms of teaching, I think it's actually a little bit easier. In terms of working, for rookies, it's a tough gig. Working from home.
I mean, that's what's weird is COVID was a silver lining in all this for myself because I kind of gave up on Chicago in regards to finding work there, and my friend offered me to go get my master's because a lot of the colleges I was teaching at were like, look, we can no longer grandfather you in. You need to get your master's. So pretty much I was kind of like high and dry, like, okay, what now? And then my friend who teaches at this school, Purdue, was like, "Hey, come down, get your master's," and I was like, "Oh, okay." And it's been great because I'm just working as a TA, and that's paying my way through the college. And all of a sudden, I was starting to get calls for studios from Chicago, like, "Hey, you put an application in a year ago," and I'm I was like, I'm in Indiana, and he's like, no, we can use you now. And at this studio that I must have applied for, like, I don't know how many years, finally, like, said, yeah, and I work with them through the usual Slack type, environment. And it was a great experience, got to work on a pretty high profile project. And I was like, oh my gosh, got that done. And then I got another call from another company, and I'm got like 3 Netflix shows and 2 features lined up coming up. So, and this is all remotely. I'm thinking this would have never happened if it weren't for COVID.
Yeah, for our business, the genie's out of the bottle. For years, when my students were asking me, is it possible once you get a bit of experience to work from home? Like, forget it, zero chance. That's never gonna happen. The studios are way too, they have cold feet with leaks and people, footage being outside of the walled garden of the studio. And somehow COVID happened, and somehow everybody's working from home, and somehow there's no leaks, and everybody's working, no problem. So the genie's out of the bottle. It's going to be really, really hard to put that genie back in now. I don't think we're going to be fully remote all the time for everybody. That's nobody wants that, I think. But definitely, especially for more veteran senior types where you don't need as much supervision, as much hand-holding. Just give me the pixels, I'll give you a shot. I'll check in once a day, I'll send it to dailies, no problem. A lot of people, I think, will benefit from that long term. I don't think they'll be able to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, and that might be good for some, bad for others, but hey, let's just see what happens.
I think it's going to settle down like a mix, Some people, they don't have the space at home. They have like noisy kids or whatever. They need to be at the office. They like to be at the office. They want to get out of the house and stuff like that. That's cool. I think it's going to be my personal opinion, if you're a smart studio, I would just do a like co-working type of space. I would not assign desks to anybody. I would just have a bunch of thin clients with monitors at every desk, and just like, okay, on Monday, desk number 6 is assigned to Xavier because he needs to come in because he needs to network with people and be interactive. So we'll have the whole comp team from that show work on Monday because they need to be close together, because there's a lot of bouncing of ideas and stuff like that. And then the rest of the week, you can just work from home. And you don't have your physical machine under your desk. It's just in a rack somewhere. And then, if you're at the office, you log into that same machine from your desk. If you're at home, you log in from that same machine from your home. And, Teradici or HPRGS or what's in fashion at that moment. But yeah, so if you're a smart facility person, a smart studio person, you would definitely look at that. If you still think that in 2 years, 5 years, it's going to go back to everybody's got their own computer under their desks, like old times, I think you're going to miss the boat a little bit.
Well, let's if you don't mind, did you want to take a look at your showreel real quick, or are you
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
we can. Yeah, it's quite
okay?
old now. I haven't updated in a long time, but yeah.
If whenever you hear someone say their reel is old, meaning they're working in the industry, they're too busy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, after a while, the reel's kind of a formality. It's more for yourself to keep a log of the cool stuff you've worked on. But yeah, that's Prometheus. I worked at that on at Fuel in Australia. Really good shop. I really enjoyed working there. It's a bit of a shame that they've been like they got absorbed in the big Animal Logic machine. Um, yeah, so that's cool. Um, the main novelty there is that was the first time I worked on a show that used deep compositing extensively. I didn't do that much deep myself. Like this is a typical shot that used deep quite a bit. I didn't use it myself that much. Most of these shots for me were set extensions, like the holograms somebody else worked on. These shots should not be that in the front of my reel anymore. It's just at the time that I cut the reel, we just had a VS nomination for it, so I was kind of like, well, if I'm gonna show off, I'm gonna show them. But yeah, it's kind of a little bit misleading. I didn't comp the whole thing. Shout out to Denis Collant, who actually comped that shot. I think it's him who comped the whole thing with the holograms. Yeah, so that was paint out of the physical gadget they had on the desk, replace it with a CGI mask machine type of thing. That was a blue screen outside the window. Shout out to Tom Cruise, who actually hung out on the side of the Burj Dubai. No VFX, only cable removals. That's
Yeah,
yeah,
that guy, man. I tell you, getting in F-15 fighters or whatever.
yeah, no, he's mental. I've seen the original raw plates from that shoot from Mission Impossible, and he's actually physically hanging out from the side of the building. There's only like a harness cable that needed to be painted out because he's mental, but not that mental. But yeah, he's actually stepping outside the building, and the camera's on a crane following him. And I actually went, "What? What? You expect it to be a blue screen or see the parking lot one story below, just some random office building in Pasadena or something." And he's like, "Whoa, whoa, he's in Dubai for real? Whoa, he's on the 78th floor or something? What the hell?"
This shot in Knowing was amazing. I thought these shots where the whole the city of New York gets destroyed. Now,
Yeah,
how did you
that was
guys
a
do
fun
that? I
sequence.
mean, is that all like simulation stuff in Houdini
Yeah,
or?
at the end, that's what it was. So these are Sims. So that was a few years ago. So the Sim guy was stressing out a little bit because it was a big volume to fill. He had to break it down in chunks, and I had to stitch the chunks together. And it wasn't really planned to be that epic originally. So I think everybody got caught by surprise a little bit. Um, so the original plan for this was kind of, oh, we'll do like comp things. So I'm like, okay, do you have like elements shot for this? Oh, I don't know. Maybe we can find something in the element library. No, no, we didn't. So the sim guys had to like work double time to pick the slack there.
I
But
love this.
it
The
worked
sound
out.
effects really sold it too. Like when the building crumbles in this scene, it kind of goes. It's just like it really made you feel like.
Yeah, yeah, it always works out in the end. That's the thing with this business. It might be a bit rocky there, but yeah, I like this shot. This is one of my favorite shots in the reel. The ILM of Pirates of the Caribbean 3. This was a miniature, actually. Miniature on the blue screen, shot in a parking lot. And the rolling edge of the sand was sand from Hulk, the original Hulk from Ang Lee. It's shot on a trampoline, like where they pinch the trampoline and it jumps out, and I just cut slices and offset them by a frame, so there it makes it like a Mexican wave type of thing. Yeah, yeah. So there's no CG in there at all. It's the desert's real, the ship's a miniature, and the sand is an element. The only thing that's fake was that little you can't even see it with all the sand, but there's like the trace in the sand from the ship. It's a matte painter at ILM. It's Paul Houston, right? Who's a legendary matte painter that started painting on glass, in the 70s. And everybody's like, "Oh, you're getting elements from Paul," and I'm like, "Who's Paul?" And I had to look him up, and I'm like, "What a waste!" you, the guy's a legend, and he's like doing 4 paint strokes in Photoshop to give me that little trace in the sand. I'm like, really? that's the guy you're gonna assign to that task. That was kind of wild, but I got to meet him. It was really cool. Like ILM is pretty legendary. It's lots of hard work. It's a lot of work to be there, but yeah, good pictures they make there for sure. The one in the middle is a miniature as well, and the one on the right's full CG. That's one of the few shots in my career actually we teamed. It was so last minute in the schedule that we had to be 3 compers at one on the same shot, which I've never done before or since. There's a lot of stuff there. Each cannon blast is an element shot on green screen. So that was a lot of work.
Antoinette. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
What a
Yeah, that's
nightmare.
pretty nasty green screen.
What the heck?
Yeah. Actually, that show, the green screens were actually really good. I mean, the backgrounds were nasty, but you use screen correction, and it's not that bad. But they actually shot the backgrounds first. They actually went to the real palace. It's not the Sofia Coppola one; it's a different one. But yeah, they actually shot the backgrounds first in place at the real Versailles Palace in France, and they shot a bunch of random backgrounds at every possible angle and zoom levels and whatever. And on the set, they actually had the backgrounds to show the DOP, and they actually lit for the background, which is unusual. This never ever happens. So if there was a window on a side or a lamp or something, he would actually light the green screen to match. So even though the actual green screen were a bit nasty, the lighting was exceptional. This is probably one of the best lighting I've had for green screens. So if you were able to actually pull the key properly, you had very minimal color correction to get it to fit with the background, and it ended up making pretty good looking shots, I think, in the end.
Wow. Of course, the classic snakes on a plane.
Yeah. I think I want to say in that sequence he pushes the button on the it's not in the reel, but in the movie he pushes a button on the microwave, and they've got like popcorn pizza, and there's a button that says snake, and he pushes the snake button. I want to say that I did that. I feel like I put the snake label in there. If somebody remembers from Hybrid, just put a comment. But yeah, so that was fun. That was a meat cannon they had at the back of the microwave with compressed air. So you had to paint out the rig and replace, put the so yeah. That was Apocalypse 10.5. Pretty difficult movie to watch. The acting's pretty rough. The whole thing is they had this very 90s like zoom in, zoom out, nervous camera. It's pretty hard to watch. Good shots though. Sin City.
Sin City, oh wow.
Yeah. I did so many shots on there. We were just cooking on that show. Black and white, high contrast.
Yeah.
You don't see anything, so I don't think I put out that many shots in so little time.
Crush the
It was
blacks,
fun
it'll
show to
hide the
work.
bad CG.
Yeah. Oh, and Robert Rodriguez doesn't care.
He don't
just
care.
wants
He's
to
like,
get
"I
the
got a
shots.
movie."
Yeah.
Rebel without a crew.
Yeah. I mean, he's cool. It's one of the few times that actually a director came up to Hybrid and showed up in person. Yeah, most of the time it was over Skype and whatever. And he showed up for a session with his guitar and everything, cowboy hat. It was
Let
fun.
me play a tune.
Yeah. He was roaming the hallways like, okay, now let's meet so-and-so. He's working on such and such sequence. You want to have a look at it? Yeah, sure. And he would just roam the hallways of the...
Was there like an era in VFX, since you're a veteran, where you had more communicate with the director or one-on-one, or at least you'd see them once in a while, and now it's like, nope,
Maybe at, the old school, like LA shops back when LA was huge, maybe because you were in the same city, there was more of a chance that the director would swing by to, let's say, Digital Domain or something like that back in the days in Venice. But I've never been part of that because there was a bigger chance of that happening years ago. I was at Hybrid up in the sticks, so they wouldn't come up here. It's too far. They don't give a crap. And they were Hybrid, since they knew where they were physically in the world. They knew they had to get their game on for remote, director sessions and stuff like that. So they were pretty early in the game with CineSync. They had their own version of CineSync before CineSync called HiSync, and they would send the QuickTimes to the clients, and they had the software that would sync up the playback on both ends of the connection. So you because the internet was too slow back then, so you couldn't like stream like we're doing today. So they would just have the QuickTimes upload in ahead of the meeting, and the software would just sync it up. They could draw on it, have notes and stuff like that. So there was really no need for the directors to come up there, and because you're just a grunt, you're just one of the artists, you're not in that meeting. You're just, so the closest I've been was maybe ILM. They had a pretty surprisingly flat structure for such a big company. So you'd go to dailies. There was the in-house VFX soup, and then the soup would deal with the director. So you were pretty close to the top of the pyramid. So the notes you would get wouldn't be like trickled down through 8 layers of middle management. So that was pretty great. So that show, Pirates, I worked on Pirates of the Caribbean 3. It was so many shots. There were actually two soups, which I've never seen since then. So they split the show in half. So such and such sequence, that was Roger Guyett, and the other sequences were John Knoll. So
well,
that was
with your span of experience, and I hate to sound like a crybaby here, but what is the work hours for an average person in Montreal? Has it changed? Has it decreased, increased? Is it still like insane hours, but you get 1 day off or whatever?
It's hard to tell. I mean, it's because I haven't done like full-time comp in a few years now. I think well, for Montreal compared to when I started, I think the labor laws are more enforced than they were. Like the laws didn't change as far as I know. I think the laws were the same for the last like 30 years. So Quebec's pretty stringent for labor laws, and it's like first 40 hours are at regular pay, and then the 41st hour should be at time and a half, and then after quite a few more, I don't know what the limit is. I think you need to be at double time, but nobody hits that. It's like really high, the limit. But that was kind of very loosely enforced. Like when I started, it was not enforced at all, and was kind of a mafia situations. Like, oh, we would like to give it to you, but all our competitors are not doing it. So if we do it, then we'll go out of business because we're not the same as everybody else. And it was kind of like that. And then the subsidies came and everything. It become more embarrassing to completely ignore the laws when the government's paying like 40% of your salary of your salary of your employees. So I think now it's more enforced. So it kind of keeps a lid a little bit on crazy overtime because it's more expensive. Because back in my day, if you did overtime at the same rate, then it makes no sense for them to hire somebody else. They're like, well, I could spend the time to train and hire a new guy, or I could get this guy to work an extra day. So, and it's the same price. So why? So with the time, yeah. So for the time and a half now, it kind of puts an incentive to hire more people if you have more work. But I mean, it's still VFX. Let's not kid ourselves. You're not gonna do like clean, tidy 40-hour weeks for the whole year. So I think there's crazier markets in Montreal. I think it really depends which shop too. It's so different from shop to shop. Every shop's got a different vibe. So yeah, I think it's not as bad as it used to be. I think.
Okay.
Maybe not. I don't know.
I'd throw it out there just so.
I think the other big difference is there's so much more work. When I started Hybrid, there was like 1 or 2 company in game. Like when I started Hybrid, literally, if you wanted to work on Hollywood movies, that was the only place in Quebec where you could do that back then, 20 years ago. And then there was another shop called Meteor that started getting like proper work, but they went bankrupt. So, and then at some point, like there was a alignment of planets with subsidies and whatever, and then it just took off like rocket fuel because at some point we hit critical mass of artists. There was just enough people, so they're like, okay, if I set up shop there, I don't have to import every single body on the floor.
Somebody should make a documentary on every merger and bankruptcy in the history of VFX.
Oh my God, that documentary would be 7 hours long. But it's
meanwhile, over in LA, this was going on. And then all of a sudden, and then it talks about, it would be cool to see a whole timeline documentary on how the subsidies and, all that stuff was moving around across the U.S., but it would be so boring no one would want to watch it,
Yeah.
Anyway, but
I mean, the main issue is that our business only has like 5 customers or 6 customers. So that's what drove like the industry to such weird places, because you have 100 studios competing for work from 5 customers. So of course there's a huge imbalance of power there. So that's why there's so many mergers and bankruptcies and shops buying other shops, because in the end, the only way you can attain equilibrium is when you have 5 mega VFX companies that are at equal footing with the 5 customers. The customers being Marvel, Paramount, Warner Brothers, all those big studios. So when you have 5 customers, you can only end up with 5 mega companies that can compete with them. So when the studios like Marvel or whatever are making unreasonable requests, the big mega company like Weta and MPC and they can go, well, sure, you could choose not to hire us if you want to nickel and dime us. Now try to find somebody else to do your 1,000-shot show. Bye. Because back in the day, they would go, okay, there's 100 names in that list. So if you don't want to do it for that price, I'll go to the next guy and I'll go to the next guy. But as the shows grew to be a 2,000 show ordeals, and as the companies kept bigger, the VFX shops, then we're starting to hit that equilibrium a little bit. So there's no room for middle-sized shops anymore. It's all tiny boutiques or mega corporations. The one thing I did not anticipate was the big shops camouflaging themselves under many names. It's not hidden, but it's kind of like a solution I did not anticipate is having like a Technicolor having like 5 different companies or DNEG or stuff like that, where they have like Redefine and DNEG and blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, okay, I'm not working for a multinational 7,000 employee company. I'm working for this tiny 100-person studio that's part of this multinational 7,000 people.
And the reason to do that would be like to have all these little babies that are actually cloaked, camouflaged to be one big baby. It would be.
I think it's because humans don't like to work. Like you can deal with 100 people company, no problem. When you walk in the hallway, you can recognize most of the faces, and it feels good. So and it's also a way to separate the work in different specialties. So I kind of like the way DNEG is doing, which is like prime focus really, but like they've got now in Montreal, they've got 2 studios, I think. They've got a one that's more focused on Bollywood and like lesser high profile projects, and they've got their kind of premium brand, which is DNEG. So it's a good way to also for training for artists, so you can onboard juniors in the studio that's kind of less glamorous and less premium, and just use that as a training ground as well as to actually produce work. And then you can upgrade artists to the other, so they're still in the same kind of general brand. So that's kind of, I don't think it's a good or a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. If it's done well, it's actually good because it shields you from feeling like working in this monster company that's got 7 million employees worldwide. So you still have the feeling on working on a medium-sized shop without the risk of a medium-sized shop. That's what killed Fuel. That's what killed Meteor. I've seen that firsthand, is because when you hit that kind of puberty stage where you're not a tiny boutique anymore, but you're not big enough to run multiple shows at once, that's a problem, because the minute you've got a gap in the schedule, you have to pay all these people to do nothing.
It's the gaps that kills them, huh?
Yeah. So the big shops, they don't care because they're running like 6 shows in parallel. So if one dies, they just switch the artist over to the next show and nothing happened, So the mega shops, they don't care anymore. The tiny shops, if you have a dry spell, you've got 7 people on the payroll, who cares? You can pay them for a month, no problem. It's when you've got like 80 people, with decent salaries, and you get a dry spell, that's when the shit gets rough. So Fuel at the end, just before they got bought out at the last minute when they went bankrupt, we were working like on cigarette commercials for Malaysian markets and stuff like that. Like, there's still cigarette commercials? What's happening?
Well, let's jump over to your computer. Let's share your screen.
So yeah, it's a demo I built. Somebody asked me to do a demo for a facility, so it's actually very convenient that you asked me just after that, so I don't have to rebuild the whole demo. Yeah, so it's basically an overview of all my nodes for people that may or may not be familiar with them, in no particular order. They're just like randomly. So yeah, so the whole tool set is, I don't know, that many nodes. I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 nodes. There we go. I haven't updated it in a while, but it's due for a little upgrade, I think.
There
There's
might be a
few
video
glitches.
issue because even though I can see your nuke and everything, when you pull a window open on a menu, it comes up blank.
Oh, okay. Well, it doesn't matter. Okay. So yeah, but can you see like the knobs and
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah, we're good.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right. So there's a dozen nodes in there. Some of them more useful than others. I think that this thing kind of grew more than I thought. A lot of people anecdotally say, hey, I just started at such and such studio in London and your stuff's already installed. I don't have to install it. I'm like, that's pretty cool. This thing kind of grew over the years. So the first one we can look at is kill spill. So as the name implies, these spills. It's using the formula that's in either Ron Brinkman's book or what's the other guy's name? Forget it.
Steve, right?
Steve Wright, thanks. There's only 2 books in our whole.
There's only 2 authors in the
so
whole
it's
industry.
either Brinkman or Steve Wright. So I think it's the formula from Steve Wright's book. It's pretty well known. So there's you pick which kind of screen you have, green, blue, or whatever. And then there's suppression, limiter, and spill tweak. These are kind of hard to explain in a couple lines, so I made a little graphic here. So when you're spill suppressing, what's happening is that you're cutting the green channel. Let's say you've got a green screen, of course. You're limiting the green screen to the average of red and blue. That's the default kind of formula. So if red and blue are low and your green is high, it means it's a green pixel. It's the green screen, for instance. You don't want to kill the green completely because it's going to go magenta. You just want to prevent green from going above red and blue. So that's what's happening. When you're in the node, when you're playing with the suppression knob, you're just changing which channel you're using as the limit. So by default, if it's at 0.5, you're using the average of red and blue. But if you have, let's say, the skin tone, whoops, my bad. If you have skin tone that needs to keep a little bit of green or blonde hair, stuff like that, then you can choose to be the limit on one side. Then you're going to use the red channel as the limit. So green has more headroom for skin tone, for instance. Or if you want to be more aggressive on the D-spill, you can use blue as the limit. And then since blue is lower in skin tone, then the green's going to be limited lower. So that's what suppression does. It's basically switching which channel you're using as the limiter. By default, it's a mix of both. If you swing it one side, it's going to be only red. If you swing it the other side, it's going to be only blue. So that's suppression. And limiter is you just take the line and move it. So if you've got like default suppression, so mix of red and blue, and you need to have green go higher, then you just move the limit higher. Or if you want to be more aggressive, you move the limit lower. And then the third one is spill tweak. So if you want to use your spill, there's a Marie-Antoinette shot again from my reel. And if she's walking by something and you replace that with something that's very bright or colorful, let's say the wall I'm going to put there is going to be a red wall, what you could do is change the spill tweak and make the spill a certain color. So you can actually benefit from the spill. Instead of being just annoyance for you when you're keying, you can actually use it to your advantage and go, well, she's being lit by the wall. I'm replacing the wall, so whatever I'm putting there is red. I'm going to replace the spill to red, and so when she walks by, the dress is going to get a little bit red as if she's being lit by the CG wall I'm putting there. And also, you can adjust that. If you don't want to do the whole color thing, you can use it just as a intensity. So if the spill feels too bright or too dark, then you can just bias it to make it darker or brighter. And you can even go negative. So that's not intuitive because the UI is set to stop at 0, but you can actually, if you want to get really dark, you can actually have some negative values, or you can even like break it down and have negative values per channel. So That's not obvious to people because I didn't set the slider to go from minus whatever to plus.
When we were
So-
doing the Sam Jackson Capital One commercials, your entire library was in use. The PF, plenty of the PFs in our default scripts, you know.
Nice. So yeah, so it's basically, I mean, 99% of the time you can just like use the default kill spill and it's going to give you a reasonable result. But here, like I've tweaked it a little bit. So when you turn on and off, you see that the hair doesn't go all magenta. If you do a default one, blonde hair is notoriously tricky. So if you go too aggressive on one side, so now I'm using the blue channel as the limit. There's no blue in the hair, so the green gets capped real low. If I switch the other side, then it's all green because now I'm using only the red channel as the limit, and it goes pretty high. So you gotta nudge that, and you can also, whoops, here we go. And you can also, if you pump up the limit too high, then there's no D-spell because the limit is super high. If you pump it real low, then it's going to go magenta. So by playing with these two guys, you can usually find a happy medium where the background, where the hair doesn't get all magenta and you still have your D-spell going on. Sometimes you might have to do a couple D-spells, one for the hair and one for everything else, and key mix them together or whatever. All right, so that's D-spells, fairly straightforward node once you know how to use it. 9 times out of 10, you just use the defaults, I think. And what I like about it is it's pretty much the same formula that's used by IBK, so it's really easy to mix and match between IBK's D-spill and your own. The erode node is, the erode tools in Nuke are pretty blunt force, so this one's a little bit smoother. So it chooses the alpha, so the bigger you do it, the more inward you go. It's basically a blur and a multiply, or a blur and min, and then the gamma is the fall off. So if you want it to be real aggressive, you have a lower gamma, and if you want it less aggressive, just to soften the edge a little bit. So what's cool about it is that it's doing a min. So often with erodes, if you have a corner like that, it's gonna do webbing on the corner, and I think I'm doing a min inside. I'd have to look. So it can never fill a hole. So it's only going to make it smaller. It's never going to make it bigger. So that's useful. And you've got settings here if you want to deal with pre-multiplication. So if you just want to do the alpha and not do the RGB, you could set that to off and off. And then my RGB is not going to be affected, only the alpha. It's a little bit convoluted this because I'm doing negative erode as well. You can grow as well as shrink. So when it's set to auto, when you're growing, it's not going to do the unpremult, premult. And when it's positive, it's going to do unpremult, do the erode, and then premult on the RGB.
Okay. So like a switcheroo going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's a little switch that checks if that value is negative or not. So, I mean, most of the time you don't have to worry about that and just do your work, and it's going to work as expected. I take big pride in doing sensible defaults in my nodes. So if you don't want to bother with details, you just have to do the basic stuff. All right, so I've got the merge wrap here, which is a replacement for over, mostly for CG or keying. So if you do an over, this is what what your shot should look like. Merge wrap is meant to do edge wrap on both sides, so this is way too big, of course, but this is for the demo. So this is to wrap the background on top of her. So you've got a wrap that takes the values from the background, blurs them, and wraps it on the edge. And you've got the back one that makes her bleed onto the background. So of course this is way, way too big, but you would do something like that.
So it's like a combo light wrap merge, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And it does 2 wraps. It does one for her to bleed onto the background, and another one for the background to bleed onto her. So it's kind of to set that up manually is a bit finicky. So I do this, and you have different ways to put the wrap on top. You can do an over, or you can do a plus, so it changes the vibe on the edge here. I've got Pixel Distort. That's probably one of the more useful ones. So the basic use for that is to do like refractions or reflections. So you've got an image here, and you take some refraction map like noise or something like that, and then you can use it to warp the picture here. So if you've got animated noise, you can make like little waves and stuff like that. So that's the main intent for it. It's heavily inspired from a GenArt Sapphire plugin, and then I made a little demo here where I'm using it to do a fake reflection. So let's pretend you've got this CG bird here. It's just a frame hold from the bird that I moved over, but pretend it's a CG bird or something. Then you can just use it to do like pseudo reflections on an uneven surface. And then I've added a little defocus on the front. So that's the main use for this. But one cool use for it is for keying or roto. So if you've got an imperfect key here, let's say, with pretty nasty edges, so I've made a shitty key on purpose here, so it's pretty bad. And then what you can do is you can unpremult your best attempt at the key, do a peaks at the start, and use the alpha channel as the deformation channel, and it's just gonna basically warp the edge. So it's a contrast-based deformation. So when pixels are the same next to each other, it doesn't do anything. So here and here and here is not going to do anything because all the pixels are the same. Same with the black areas. But when pixels next to each other are different, then that's when the deformation happens. So which is perfect. That's where we want the warp to happen, only on the edge. So it's not going to do like big motion blur problems. But if you have tiny 2-3 pixel black white edges or something like that, it's going to boost the edge. So if we look at the result, this is without and this is with. So this is a pretty cool trick, I think. We used that back in the day of, Spy Kids 3. Not this one, because I hadn't made it then, but something similar. That's where I learned that trick. Somebody showed that to me, and I was like, this is really cool, guy.
So this is not, it's not technically edge blending, is it? It's not, it's...
No.
No.
It's warping. You're actually taking your RGB, and the problem is this is not the good values in the RGB for whatever reason. Usually it's because there's too much sharpening happening on the green screen in the camera or somewhere else in the pipeline before it got to you. And so basically you're taking the skin tone here and you're warping it to take the place of the bad edge. So you're not changing the alpha channel, you're just warping the RGB to basically inflate the RGB to take the place of the bad edge. So if you look at it just on the RGB side, that's what's happening. It's kind of Foundry just came out with something to do something similar, but I don't think it's a straight replacement for it. So I can't remember the name of the node off the top of my head, but yeah. So this is very useful. It's useful for keying when you've got like over sharpened green screens and stuff like that, like this. But it's also useful for roto because when you're doing detailed roto, if I don't have this, there you go. So often you'll end up with that. If your roto is just out for a millimeter, then you're gonna get a bit of the background coming through the edge, and to fix that is really annoying. You got to go through all your keyframes and nudge the roto a pixel inside and stuff like that. So you can use the exact same technique here, which is very useful. So you can just use the same peaks at the start to inflate the RGB. And now if you look at it before and after, so the alpha didn't change. The roto's the same. Nothing changed on the alpha side. You're just tweaking the RGB to fill the edge here. So of course this won't help if you're way off because there's a limit to how much warp you can do. But if you're off by a couple pixels, then it helps quite a bit. So we showed that already. ID focus kind of deprecated now because now we have Z defocus in Nuke. So this predates Nuke's Z defocus. So it's still good to do like really quick bash comps and stuff like that. So you can just feed it a map of where you want more or less defocus. So the white parts are going to be lots of defocus and black is 0 defocus. And it's going to do like 10 different defocuses of 10 different values, and it's going to splice them together. So you can get progressive, smaller defocus and bigger. And you also have like kernel control, so you can choose what's the shape of your iris. So
I sometimes wonder, and again, we could call it quote unquote inspiration. that the folks at the foundry saw your plugins, which are used across the entire industry, and said,
Very,
let's
it's
try
impossible
something
to
like
tell.
that.
Yeah, but definitely, definitely, it's always suspicious that it came out after. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe they just came out. I mean,
We'll
if
we'll
you
call it
task somebody,
we'll call it
yeah.
inspired. We'll call it
But to
inspired.
be honest, like if you
Yeah.
task somebody with, okay, we need to have something to deal with progressive defocus or progressive blur, everybody's gonna end up with the same solution at the end. You know, it's always gonna end up. And you know and the iris control that you have here is actually Nuke's flare node. So if you use the flare node, you can actually, that's where what I'm using to draw the shapes. So you can control how many sides you want. So if you want an iris, where is it? Edge. I'm not in the right node. There we go. Corners. Here we go. So if you want a bokeh that's like a little, octagon or whatever, then you can have that here. So now I'm using little octagons. You can also feed it your own kernel. So if you have a picture of your iris shape, or you can make your own or take a sample from the camera, then you can have bokeh that's custom here. So you can do little hearts or little stars or whatever if you can't get what you want from this. And yeah, just to be clear, progressive defocus is not the same as a masked defocus. So here, if you're using the same alpha channel to drive just a regular defocus node, not the Z defocus, then you end up with a big defocus that gets progressively more transparent. It's not the same as a defocus that gets progressively smaller. So if you want to do progressive defocus, you got to either use that or Nuke's Z defocus node. That's a common rookie mistake that newbies do, is they go, oh, I want less defocus here, so I'm just going to mask a defocus or a blur node. And of course, in there you can use Convolve, which will have custom kernels. So if you want octagons and stuff like that, you can use the regular defocus node, which is a bit faster. So if you want circles and you don't care, you can use that. And you can also use regular blurs, so you can switch from one from the other. But again, all of this can be done now with Z defocus, either using the custom, what's it called? Filter input. So that's where you would feed in your little octagons. And if you want just little circles, you can use that, and you can use bladed if you want to specify how many octagons, stuff like that. But I don't think you can. Oops, I don't think you can do regular blur. I just noticed. So if you want progressive blur and not progressive convolve, then you're stuck with me. You have to use this guy. All right. PXF line is not an actual gizmo. It's just a roto paint node. So if I create a fresh one, if you do, this is not a gizmo. This is not a group. This is just a regular roto paint node that's preloaded with one paint stroke that's got two points on it. So you can do, yeah, exactly. So you can do like a straight line really easily. I think it's more streamlined than the open splines, because if you do an open spline here, like so, with 2 points, and maybe you just want to do 3 points to do a little curved line. Oops, my bad. Then you end up with, like for this guy, enter. There you go. I'm already struggling. See what I'm saying? Come on. All right. So if you want to play with this guy, then you end up with like 5 controls. You've got the one in the middle, one here for the feather, one here for the width, and one tangent and another tangent that both can be independent from each other. That's a lot of control if you just want to do a simple line. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I made this. So you can do a straight line, but you can also add points in the middle, just like any roto. So where's my overlay? There we go. So you can add a point here and just bend it like them. So Control-Alt, just like a regular roto. So, and if you want to play with the thickness, you just go to the stroke tab and just change the size. If you want to play with the feather, you play with the hardness. So you can have very thick or very soft or very hard lines. So usually what I do is I just create a default one and I copy paste. That's the only clunky bit about that I couldn't figure out easily. So I use the default one, and then if I need a new one, I would just like duplicate the stroke and then bring it somewhere else, and then duplicate and do something else. So you can use that to do these types of roto if you have like power lines or, stun people harnesses to paint out, to do wire removal and stuff like that. I think it's easier to just have a couple points to play with. It's kind of the B spline to the open spline. Like open spline is kind of like Bezier. This guy is kind of a B spline, more simpler controls, but you might end up with a few more points. But I think it's simpler to play with. And then using that, I created an alpha channel for the whole thing using a Luma key and Erode and a couple PXF lines. And I've used I think it's probably my more useful one with PXF Distort is a PXF filler here. So what it does is it basically does infill. It takes values from the edge of the alpha channel and it stretches it inwards. So if I do a simpler shape, it's easier to understand. Like that. So if I just do a quick roto here, like that. So what it does is by default it does a vertical fill. So it takes the values from the edge of the alpha channel and smears it inwards. And at some point, if it's big enough, it's going to meet in the middle and fill the hole completely. So it's kind of like Photoshop's healing brush, healing patch type of thing without the extra texture. So this is a vertical fill. If you want horizontal, then you would do like something like that. So now I'm filling from the sides instead of filling from top and bottom. If you've got the same value on both, then you're going to do a fill. Oh, I'm going to make it smaller so it's easier to see. So now you're filling from it's kind of like the normal. It's kind of the 90 degrees to the normal. So it's basically if you have a diagonal edge, it's going to go 90 degrees to that edge. If you got a vertical edge, it's going to fill horizontally. If you got a horizontal, it's going to fill vertically. If you had a vertical edge, then it's going to fill from up and down. And if you got something that's vertical, then it's going to fill from the side. And then at some point, it's going to meet in the middle. Like that. So if you tweak it just right, you can actually, this is a surprisingly good demo. It worked better than I expected. So you've got this is a time lapse with clouds moving in the background. So I've created a filler here and I'm just using one filler with proper settings here and this alpha channel, which makes, I got to make sure it covers everything. Otherwise it's going to start to fill the power lines instead of filling the clouds. And yeah, so this is it, one filler node, and it's actually, because the fill gets updated at every frame, if the background moves or changes, lighting changes, it's going to update with it. So this is actually pretty good. And to make it really, I wouldn't say perfect, but better, then I made two different ones. So this one's more optimized for the power lines, so it's not as good for the big stuff like the tower, but it's good for the little these guys, the little 2-pixel power lines. And I've got one that's more optimized for the big stuff, but then you can kind of see the power lines, they're not that great here. So, and then I just combine both of them with crappy roto here. So you've got the small filler for the power lines and the big filler for the tower. And then when you look at that.
In a practical example in your history of working in the industry, where have you used this? Where has this like saved your rear end?
To erase wires and tracking markers, tracking markers that linger on the edge of something, where you can't just roto it, because if you roto it in the motion blur or in the defocus, you're going to see, you're going to have to chew your edge to get rid of the marker completely. So then you can use a filler to rebuild the missing edge. To make it right. Yeah, and well, this is a perfect example. So if you needed to remove wires of any kind, like stun people wires or power lines or stuff like that, this is a perfect tool for that.
For our audience, we cannot supply this script with this material since it is copyright material, Marie Antoinette and all that. So hopefully you guys can just download these pixels and go shoot some power lines. And
well, this is actually from Pexels. So if you hunt around, you can find it. I mean, it's always something you go, I'll do that someday. I should do a bunch of YouTube videos, one per node, and I have a link to the stock footage so people can try them. I'll try to do that if there's enough demand. Like, put your demand, ask me in the comments if there's enough demand, I'll do it. But yeah, so play around with it. It basically takes the edge of whatever you supply it, and then it's just going to fill from the edge. Another useful way is for beauty work here. So I've done a demo here where you've got a guy with imperfect skin, and you can use a filler to get rid of the, I don't know if you can see the before and after over Skype, but yeah, so you basically get rid of the stuff. So it's quite simple. If you do something like this, you feed it the image you want to repair if you want, and then an alpha of the zone. So a quick way to do this would be to use a paint node with white paint strokes. So you can just do a...
And those are, they can be tracked on the head.
Yeah, well, you can use like smart vectors or something
Smart
or
vectors,
track it.
yeah.
So of course this goes outside the scope of the node. You're in charge of making sure your alpha sticks and tracks, but yeah, but you can just do. Let me grab my pen so you can just.
Would
do
you
something like that.
degrain the image obviously first and then regrain it?
Well, yeah, you could, but I've got a little trick for that down the line. Give me a second. So you see, I'm just painting. Definitely you could degrain. That's probably the better way to do this. But so now I'm just painting white paint strokes, and that's being used as my alpha to drive the filler here. So I can just like easily paint out.
This guy would never be on a Hollywood movie anyway, right? With all his acne.
Well, you're not lying, but yeah. So, well, yeah, I mean, maybe not that much, but even actors have bad days, So, I know guys that were on zit detail on the Harry Potter movies. They were teenagers. So, there you go. So, like that. So, of course, you need to track it. But see, just using the default filler, so it's using the values just outside the alpha to infill.
So just sucking in the localized values, spatial values around the roto, and just bringing them to a center based on their normals, and then.
Yeah, it's basically really what's happening is it's a bunch of blurs and divides. So it's pre-multing with the alpha, and then it's blurring, dividing that, blurring that again, and dividing it, and again and again. So and by default, this does that 10 times. Here, that's what the iterations are. You can do more or less. So here so I've done this. I'm using smart vectors to just track my paint strokes, and using the filler to do its thing. And then I'm doing a blur divide trick to extract the detail.
What are your settings on your high pass? I'm just curious for the tracking.
I'm doing this. Yeah, so I'll show bandpass down the line, but yeah, this is just to get some details. So Smart Vector has more stuff to bite into. I don't know if it helped that much, but yeah. And here I'm just blurring big enough to get rid of the pores and the grain and stuff like that, dividing that by the original. So now I only get the small detail. And if I turn that off for a second, so now you multiply that on top of the filler, because the filler will kill grain, as you noted. You're like, oh, do I need to degrain? So that's one way to do it would be to degrain. But if you have small detail in the skin, like pores that you don't want to lose and stuff like that, then degrain won't solve that problem. So here I'm just killing everything, including small detail, and then you can mask your multiply by the same alpha. So you're multiplying the small detail on top of it. So now I'm putting the grain back and the pores and the wrinkles and whatever I need to keep. But if there's a lot of detail in the zits, then I'm putting the zits back in. So what you can do is you can do a transform and just move the skin over so you get the good.
So you're talking about high frequency salty detail, and just moving it over a little bit if there's too much detail in the zit itself. Okay.
Exactly. So in this case, I had zits all over. So I did one to move the detail on the left side of the face. I'm moving it left, and on the right side of the face, I'm moving it right, so I don't get hair and the edge of the face in the zits and stuff like that. So now, if you look at this, if you look without the blur divide, then I've got like fuzzy fillers, and then I get the detail back. So I got It looks more natural. So this is literally what's happening when you're doing a healing patch or a healing brush in Photoshop. It does it in two stages. It does a filler type of thing, just like this guy. And then when you're cloning, it's doing a blur, divide, and multiply to carry the detail over from the clone area that you're doing. So this kind of animated the healing patch, healing brush from Photoshop. Screen clean, very, very useful. Here's Marie Antoinette again. So if you somehow manage to make yourself a clean plate, or if you're really lucky, they shot you a clean plate, now go buy a lotto ticket because that doesn't happen very often. But yeah, so if you make yourself a clean plate, so I've made myself a pretty accurate clean plate of what's happening behind them, then you can use screen clean to neutralize the imperfections in the green screen.
You're world renowned for that node. Save many compositors' rear ends.
I mean, seriously, when I teach keying now, I go expect to work way more on creating the clean plate than actual keying. Like if you spend a lot of time to create a really good clean plate and do a good screen correction, you're going to save so much work down the line and it's going to look better. So you're better off putting your energy in creating the clean plate than fighting with a shitty green screen. And just to show you, you got to make sure the clean plate's real good though, because if the clean plate's wrong, let's say like this, or maybe not that much, but the clean plate is not quite lined up, then you're going to create problems, probably more than you're going to solve. So the trick is to get a really, really good clean plate. And then if you have a good clean plate, there's only one knob to play with. Well, two. You got to tell it which kind of screen you're dealing with, and then you got to set it to some green that makes sense for your shot. The default green you should update and use some green that usually I pick green that's close to the problem areas like the hair, so it doesn't do as much of a correction in the tricky parts, because it's good but it's not magic, you know, so you don't want to stretch your values too far. Hey, we're running out of time here. Oh my god.
I think you could probably get them all. I don't know, we'll see.
All right, so that's another demo of screen clean, so okay, we can go real fast on there. So I've made a
yeah, it's my fault, folks. I didn't plan this correctly. Sorry.
All right, no, that's fine. I talk too much. All right, so here another situation where I'm neutralizing an uneven green screen and preserving detail in the hair and stuff like that. And of course, these parts weren't green to begin with, so screen clean doesn't catch them. So you can just like put some constant green on top. Of course, you want to do that with everything denoised, degrained. Then there's a smaller, easier node. So bandpass is quite useful to reveal details. So if you got like a really low contrast area with some detail that's really hard to pick up for tracking, let's say you wanted to do a track of a point in the sky, then you can use a bandpass, and then you've got this here, and it's much easier to track. So I know a lot of match movers that aren't even compers that know my plugins just for that one node. They load the plate in Nuke, go put it through bandpass, and then load it up in 3D Equalizer or something. So this is very useful to extract detail on a green screen where you don't have markers, for instance. And if there's some wrinkle or something in the green screen, you can usually grab it with a bandpass. Grain is just a new grain, shitty new grain, but I've added a curve to bias it by Luma. So if you want to have less grain in the highlights, then this means that you've got lots of grain in the shadows, less grain in the highlights. So you can do it per channel. You should do it per channel. So if you want a wacky grain, let's say the blue channel, you could have something like that where you have lots of grains in the midtones and no grain at all in the shadows, in the highlights.
Any opinions in regards to the fact that you've got like DOS grain and all that, and what's your?
I've never played with it, honestly. Grain is really to me is a shot by shot thing. Trying to find a universal solution is a fool's errand. So for smaller grain like Alexa grain and stuff like that, usually you can make synthetic grain that's pretty convincing. For bigger, more complex grain like red grain, usually you want to shoot a grain sample. Trying to remake it it's going to be difficult. So it really depends. Maybe DOS grain is good. I've never had a chance to play with it. Usually I try to get the grain from the plate though. I try to subtract the denoise from the original and get the grain that way from do a minus.
I think the way that DOS grain works, I've used it. It's like clone stamping a clean portion of the grain that's been slightly recreated, but it really, in a way, it's like a clone stamp, like, a matrix
Okay,
of
so
10
it
times
does a
10, basically.
patchwork with a little area where you can extract
Yeah,
some
but
good grain.
somehow it creates a response curve. It gets the grain, but it's also like taking a chunk of that cleaned up area
Yeah. So
and
it's a bit
it's
like
clone
scan
stamping
grain,
it.
but it's got some quality of life stuff where it tiles it for you and
It's
stuff like that.
tiling, yeah, my fault, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, that sounds cool. I mean, I'm sure it's great. This is not my best node. This is kind of just a rough node that I've built to be able to bias the grain so it's more, more grain in the shadows, less in the highlights, or vice versa, or something like that. But it's just regular new grain, as bad as it is. USAT is just because there's no U node in Nuke. This is mind-blowing to me. But if you just do a U shift node, if you apply it to your color wheel, you expect the color wheel to spin, and when you do U rotation, it does this stuff, which makes sense to somebody, I guess, at Foundry, but makes no sense to me. So I've just created my own, which is
So by the time Nuke 14 comes out, there'll be a hue saturation of.
yeah, yeah, hopefully. Maybe we'll be able to add
They'll see
points
this video. I
on
know
these
there are
points.
folks from the Foundry watching my channel like a hawk, so they're probably like, "What the?"
So there you go. So if you do a proper U rotation, this is what happens. So I'm not transforming. It's not a transform here. It's a color correction that's happening. So I'm converting to HSV, adding to the H channel, and then converting it back to RGB. So this is more useful. So if you look at it in a real life scenario, if you have a picture with some saturated colors and some no saturation color, it's just going to play with the saturated ones. So the white stays the same, but the saturated ones are affected. So it's good to do little tweaks on skin tone, for instance. So I didn't roto her property, like something like that. So you can just do a little adjustment without affecting the teeth and the hair. And if you got like a white shirt, and so it makes your life easier. You don't have to mask as tightly, and it's also good when you've got really saturated colors, because if you have something really a pure color and you want to change it from red to blue, there's nothing in the blue channel to begin with. So a U rotation will actually, it's kind of a shuffle type of thing where it's going to take the values from the red channel and shift it over to the blue channel. So if you just try to do it with a regular gain, you won't go anywhere because there's nothing there to begin with. Chroma blur, that's our last one. Yay, it's 11:30 even. So chroma blur is pretty old school. It's for mini DV footage and HDV footage when you've got like really nasty chroma aliasing. So let me find out, this part here. So if you look at the red channel, it's pretty nasty. I've nastied up this shot. It wasn't that bad to begin with, but this looks like mini DV or HDV from 1997. And so chroma blur, what it does, if you look before and after, so this is before and after. So this is the red channel, and it basically fixes chroma aliasing, or attempts to fix chroma aliasing issues as best as it can. So in 2021 is quite rare. You're going to need that now, but back in the old days where you get the odd green screen shot on HDV or mini DV or DV cam or that kind of stuff. So these days it's less useful, and modern plugins like Neat Video will do something similar in a much more precise way. So this is probably one of the least useful nodes these days, but it's there. There you go. I made the whole thing. I sped through it.
Yeah, that was awesome.
All right.
Well, with that said, I think we were going to do the Q&A, but I've got a few here. Karan Kanase, show tutorial on edge blending and edge merging. I got Shahid Gair, Eddie plugin for Nuke. Tell something about it.
I don't know about it. I don't know what that is. So that's why I can tell you I don't know anything about it.
And then again, Karan Kanase, making a keying compositing video. So, hey guys, I'm trying to do as much as I can, but I try to please keep the questions. Do some research on the people that are going to be. That's why I have the Ask VFX thing. Like, just see who this is that I'm talking to, and maybe have a certain question pertaining to their plugins. that's you know, you don't just walk up to somebody and say, dance, you know, like Back to the Future here, where you know it's you know, Buford Montana with you know, shoot the gun at the Marty McFly's feet, you know, it's like, you know, it's just, I don't know. It's just, but I know we got hungry people out there to want to learn. So, but anyway, I got to run to class. I'm late, but thanks again, Xavier. We'll have this up, and again, greatly appreciated. Your plugins have been awesome, and everyone is thankful for, you know, obviously them being there. And we always see these plugins. Where'd these come from? So I'm trying to like expose the origins of these great tools we use throughout history here. So, anything you'd like to say before we cut off, or?
Oh, that's cool. If people have, you know, maybe there's a little bugs or little features that are missing or ideas for plugins, maybe leave them in the comments of the video. I'll have a look at them and see what I can come up with.
Cool. All right. Take it easy, sir.